in really quickly. So, okay, so let's go ahead and finish up with the second half of the political parties chapter. We'll go ahead and finish it today here. Let me share the screen here, and then we can go ahead and continue. All right, so okay, so let's go ahead and continue here with the political parties discussion here. Okay, so we left off on nominations because I wanted to start off on here because now we're going to get into the formal process of candidates actually securing their the right to run for these offices within the political party. So we're going to talk a little bit about primaries and how those work. So okay, so party nominations and primaries. So parties nominate candidates to run for office, right? So candidates do go through a formal nomination process, right? So we're going to talk about the nomination and the primary system um, because a lot of people are not really familiar with this. When we look at voter turnout rates, people turn out for the presidential elections, but a lot of people who aren't really keeping up with politics don't realize that there are other elections before the presidential election, right? So a couple of years ago, when we had the presidential election, we had Donald Trump on the Republican side and Joe Biden on the Democrat side. But I'm sure you all are aware that those weren't the only two people that were running for president a couple of years ago, right? There was other people like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Beto O'Rourke, Andrew Yang, on the Democrat side. Some of those names might sound familiar, right? So some of y'all might be thinking to yourself, okay, so where did that happen? What was going on in that process to where we got to Joe Biden on the Democrat side? Well, we're going to talk about the nomination and the primary election process here. So nomination is the process by which a party selects a single candidate to run for each elective office. Now, again, we tend to focus on nomination for the presidential election because that's the election that gets the most attention, it gets the most scrutiny, and so that, of course, is the best example to look at in terms of the nominating process. But that's not the only position, right? All different, the political parties, they run candidates not just at the highest level, right? Not just at the federal level, but also at the state level as well, and even at the local level, like at the county level. So they also have to go through a nomination process. Of course, obviously, it's a lot less, not as much ceremony as the presidential nomination process, but they still go through the nomination process the same, right? So let's talk a little bit about the primary election process. So most states rely on the primary election process, in which multiple candidates from the same party compete in elections to be the party nominee in a general election. So before the general election that happens in November, we have primary elections that occur throughout the country. And in these primary elections, this is where you have candidates of the same political party competing against each other to secure the nomination to move on to the general election. I like to use a sports analogy for this. This is the primary election is kind of like the playoffs, where you've got teams of the same conference competing against each other for the right to go to the Super Bowl, the World Series, all the different sports. So, we have two teams at the end, right, that compete for the championship, right? So the primary election is in the similar it's in the similar vein, right, where you've got candidates of the same party that are competing against each other, right? So this is why you had all these other candidates that I mentioned. Michael Bloomberg was another one, right? So you had all these different candidates that were running, and they were trying to win these primary elections. A primary election is pretty much the same as a regular election. It's conducted the same. The only major difference, let me explain the difference here with a primary election, is that when you go vote in a primary election, you go through the same process. So I'll explain how it works in Texas, right? You check in, you show your ID, just like we talked about in the last chapter, how Texas does require for you to have a valid state-issued ID in order to be able to vote. And then after you get checked in, then the election worker is going to ask you, which ballot do you want? Do you want a Democrat or a Republican ballot? Because then, depending on the choice you make, you are then going to be voting in that political party's primary. So, because they have to populate the ballot, right? So if you choose the Democrat ballot, then the only people that you're going to see on that ballot are going to be Democrat names, right? For all these different positions, whether it's for president, moving on down to Congress, moving on down to state legislature, and then even down to local races. You can only choose amongst the Democrats, because in a primary election, the Democrats are competing against each other to win the right to be able to move on to the general election based on them getting more votes than their other fellow Democrats, right? And of course, on the Republican side, it's the same thing. But I'm mostly talking about the Democrats now because when you have a sitting president that wants to seek reelection, you don't normally have people of the same party running against an incumbent president. It does happen, and it happened a lot more back in the olden days. In fact, back in the 1800s, the political parties had more power than the president, where you actually had situations where sitting presidents, like James Buchanan is a great example. You actually had sitting presidents that were not allowed to run for reelection because the parties went with somebody else because they did not want Buchanan to so he didn't get the nomination from his own political party. So he was only committed to one term because of how unpopular he was. So that wouldn't happen today because now the president is looked at as the de facto leader of their political party. So the presidents have more power today than what they did back in the 1800s in terms of public opinion and political power. I mean, look at Trump, right? He's not even in office, and he's like the de facto leader of the Republican Party still, right? I mean, a lot of people are saying that he's still the front runner for the nomination. Even though as I'm sure you all are probably aware, there's this legal trouble going on in the state of New York and all that. So, but with that being said, that's a whole other topic. But with that being said, obviously, of course, that's the way the primary election works, where you have to it's a competition between members of the same party, and then states can also have what's called a caucus, a closed party business meeting of citizens or lawmakers to select candidates for office. This is not as often as a primary election because a primary election is no different than a regular election where you go and you make your selection in private and then they tally the votes. In a caucus, this is, and I have a good video in Blackboard which shows this. The most famous state that does the caucus is the Iowa caucus, where it is an election, but instead of it being like a secret ballot where you just go and make your selection, a caucus meeting is where you are together with a large group of people, and you're making your selection out in the open, so to speak, right? Who's calling? I could have sworn I had to silence my phone. Sorry about that. Okay, so the way a caucus meeting works, like I said, is that you got everyone in a large room. It usually happens at schools because they have rooms large enough. Again, you can look at this in one of the CNN videos I have in Blackboard. It shows like people like in an audit, like in a school gymnasium, and they're all like asking, okay, are you supporting this candidate or this candidate? They also show like where you can write like your votes like on a piece of paper, kind of like the way they do like class elections. It's really cool. I really like caucuses. They look really cool and they're really fun. But of course, also a couple of years ago, there was an issue where the Iowa wasn't reporting. The Iowa Democrat Party dropped the ball where because of technical issues, they couldn't get the caucus numbers out that night. So the DNC kind of got mad at them and all that. So, but again, you can look this up. It's really interesting. But yeah, the end result is still the same, where they're trying to tally the votes and the support, but they do it a little bit differently, right? And they get people out, they get people in a large group, and then they try to convince each other to to try to vote for their candidate, and it's really cool. It's if you love seeing like democracy, how it works, like that's a great way to see it, right? Because you're actually people are actually debating, right? Like kind of like the way it was like back in the 1700s in the Revolutionary era time period, right, where people actually were debating and discussing and things like that. It was really it's really interesting to see. So, but again, these are kind of being phased out, and we're moving more towards primary elections. But yeah, so they're two different ways of running an election, but the end result is still the same, where they're trying to determine which candidate is going to get more votes than the other to ultimately seek the nomination. Okay. So in a general election, of course, which follows the primary election, party members are activated into local party workforces. Now, in Texas government, we go a little bit more in detail in terms of like local party structure. But of course, I can talk about that a little bit because, again, I do have some experience, coordinating with, local political parties because, like I said, I used to be a precinct chair, so I can explain a little bit in terms of how it works. Basically, the way political parties tend to work, they work as let me give you all another comparison in terms of how political parties work. So I'm sure you all are aware that I'm going to use I'm going to use I'll use customer service sales example here. So I'm sure you all are aware that during Christmas time, a lot of these retail stores, like at the mall or Target, they usually hire people for the holidays, right? They usually have like temp workers that work the holidays because there's a lot more. It's the busiest time of the year for them, right? They've got people are shopping for Christmas, so that's why there's a lot of seasonal temp work in the retail industry around that time. I like to compare political parties the same way because political parties mostly operate on a skeleton crew type of system where, because I don't know if you all knew that you could actually work for the political parties. Like one of my friends actually works for the Texas Democrat Party. That's actually her job. That's actually her, how she pays her bills. She actually works for the party. It's hard to get a job with the party though, because the parties, again, they operate on a skeleton crew basis where when it's non-election season, you just have your necessary staff, the ones actually needed for to maintain the party, throughout throughout all the time. But then as we get closer to election season, that's when the party really expands and they start getting volunteers and they start hiring temp workers and organizers and people to get people to go out in the community and turn them out to vote, right? So that's the way these political parties operate. They don't operate at full staff all the time, only during election season. So the parties also work to register voters early in the election cycle. So that's why a lot of the political parties will try to they'll make it to where they'll get their volunteers and their members to be what are called VDRs, voter deputy registrars, where you actually go and you register people to vote. You have to go through a training. The way it works in Hidalgo County is you have to go to the training in Hidalgo County, and then you get deputized to be able to register voters. You have to do this training every 2 years, and then you can also. Other counties are different in terms of how they do it. Some counties are more strict where you have to go through their training, but then other counties also have what's called reciprocity agreements, where if you show that you are a VDR in one county, they'll just honor it, and then you can go and register voters in their county, right? So because the idea is it's the same training, so they figure, okay, well, if you already have been trained to do it in Hidalgo County, then you can go do it in Starr County or Bexar County, Harris County, because it's the same process. The process, the way it works is you have the voter registration card paper. They fill it out. Then once it's filled out, you have to turn it in to the county elections department. Then they verify it, and then they send it off to the state. So they can also verify it because they have to make sure that the person who's registering is a citizen. They run their social security number. Usually takes about a month to do that, and then after a month you'll get your voter card in the mail. You don't need that card in order to go vote, but it's nice and handy because it gives you your information in terms of what districts you belong to. So on that card it will show like, okay, and this is of course based on where you live. So if you live in the city of Mission, that'll show that you live in District 15 for Congress. You might live in District 41 for the state house, and then also for your state senate and all that. And then it goes into more detail, like your city and your county and your city and all that stuff. So it gives pretty good information. But again, so that's the way the process is to register people to vote. But like I said, parties work to register voters early in the election cycle. Parties often work with nonprofits and other groups to send mail and email notices, make phone calls, organize registration drives, and knock on doors. Right. So yeah, this is the full gamut of what the political parties as you can see here, they coordinate with other nonprofits. Like I know one nonprofit that I did some work for was Battleground Texas. There's also some other nonprofits that I'm aware of, like Lupe, the Pueblo Eterno. That's another one. There's all these different kinds of organizations within the community, and what they do is, again, they help out. They do other things, during. Someone else is calling. Sorry about that. It's because I'm here in my office, so I get all these calls, but that's fine. It goes to voicemail. I'll pick it up in terms of who it is. Wow, they are not wanting to leave me alone. Okay, so sorry about that. But let's go ahead and continue. So yeah, so they hold on. Let's see if that works. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue with our discussion here. Sorry about lost the train of thought here. Okay, so these organizations, they work together with the political parties and they engage in all of these activities to try to get people out to vote, right? And they do, like I said, they do a wide range of these types of activities, right? So they will go and, one of the most common things is they'll call people. They call this phone banking, right? Um, the way that works is that they have a dialer system where you have to download the software on your computer, and then it's got a dialer system, and then you just it picks these numbers to call, and then you call them and you relay the message, depending on if, like, let's say you're volunteering for a certain candidate or you're volunteering for the party itself. Then of course you'll have like a script that either the campaigns or the parties will have, and then you'll just you'll mention the script here, and you're trying to get these people to go out to vote. The registration drives as well. This is where you set up events. This is what Battleground Texas does. They set up registration events. You set up these events, and then you go out there and you actually register people to vote. And then knocking on doors is another common one. This is called canvassing. It's also called block walking. This is where you actually go out in the community and you actually go and talk to people. And you knock on their doors and you talk to them, and you're trying to convince them to support your candidate or support the political party that you're representing. So definitely knocking on doors, I would definitely say, is probably the most effective of all these, because people definitely appreciate when, whether candidates or people working for the candidates or volunteering actually go and make the effort to actually go into the community and talk to people. So the research will definitely say that canvassing is definitely a very effective way to get people to to support you. Now, they also face the hardest task, though, which is convincing voters to show up at the polls, right? Because it's one thing for these supporters, for these people in the community to say, yeah, I support this candidate or I support this political party. But getting them to actually turn out to vote is the hardest part, right? Because we talked about how voter turnout rates are very low in America, and even more so in Texas. So voter mobilization efforts by parties has now become a science. Extensive databases of voters are used for micro-targeting. Okay, so again, let me share with you all some of my experience, because I've done some of this out here in the community. I've done some micro-targeting. So I've used a program called the VAN. It's also called the minivan. This is a program that the Democrat Party uses to what the minivan, what it does is that it has the information of people who have voted in the last several elections. Now, obviously, of course, it doesn't show who they voted for, right? Because that's secret. But it does show if someone voted or not. That information is recorded because the counties record who has voted, in those elections, right? So then the parties can acquire that information, and they can use that information to their advantage. So the way it works is you can set up an area where if you're going to go do block walking, you have to be systematic with how you're going to do your block walking. Because let's say, and this is a reality, right? Because let's say you don't have enough time to go to every house in the area that you're running for, right? Especially if you're running like a statewide campaign or a national campaign, right? It's going to be impossible to be able to knock on all the doors, right? Because there's just too many people. If it's a more local election, that's a lot more easier. But with these larger elections, it's going to be very difficult to do so. So let's say you have to be systematic with how you're going to do your door knocking. So you set up an area where you're going to go into a neighborhood, and you look at the VAN database, and you see that it gives you a list of who the voters are in that neighborhood. Now, I'm going to give you three scenarios here, and I want you all to see. I want to see if you all know like what the best strategy is. So let's say I've got 3 houses. I only have time to hit one of these houses because I got to move on to to other houses within the neighborhood. So there's 3 houses here. One of the houses, they've never voted at all. The database shows that they've never voted at all in this house. The second house shows that they have voted in the last 3 elections. Okay, so the last 3 elections we've had, they've voted. The third house shows that they voted in only one of the last 3 elections, right? So out of the last 3, they only showed up to vote one time. If you are a canvasser and you have to go to one of these 3 houses, which of these 3 houses do you think is the best choice to go to? What do you all think? I want to see what y'all think. Of the 3 that I mentioned, Which do you think would be the best the best house to go to? If you only have time to go to one of them, which do you think would be the best one? What do y'all think? Because remember, I only have time for one. So of those three, which do you think I should go to? The one where they never voted, the one where they voted 3 times, or the one where they voted once? Which do you think I should go? Let's see what y'all think. If you have time to only go to one, which do you think? Let's see. Let's check the chat here really quick. Okay, let's see what you all's response is. Okay, vote. So Hazel says voted once. Angel says voted once. Okay, so why do you all think so? So why do y'all think voted once is the best choice? I want to see what y'all think. How did you arrive to that conclusion, that decision? Because I'm gonna explain to you all what the correct answer is, but I want to see why you all went with that one. I want to see. Okay, because the second house will most probably keep going to vote again, and the first house probably not go up since the end of it. Okay, all right, Hazel. So you're partially correct when it says if they've never voted, they won't go, right? Because if I go to a house that they've never voted for, then that shows that they, for whatever reason, they don't want to vote or whatever. You're right. So that's correct. However, though, you are more likely, the correct answer is to go to the house that's voted 3 times, though, because if you go to the house where they voted once, you might have to convince them to go vote again. In the house where they have voted 3 times, you don't have to convince them because they're going to go vote. They've shown that they will continue to go vote. You have to save time because your goal there is not, you have to save time because your main objective is to get them to vote for your candidate. If you're going to go to the house where they've only voted once, then not only do you have to convince them to vote for your candidate, you also have to convince them to vote in general. But if you go to the house where they voted 3 times, you see how that saves time because you don't have to convince them to go vote. They already agree with that. All you have to do is just convince them to vote for your candidate. So you see how why the one with the 3 votes is better than the one house. Y'all see the logic behind that? Okay, Hazel says yes, makes sense. Yeah. So, and again, in an ideal world, you would definitely want to go to the house where they voted once because at least they've shown some potential. But yes, but it's better to go. And again, this is only if you can only go to one house. Ideally, of course, you would want to have more time. But let's say you've got other neighborhoods you got to hit, and there's only 2 weeks left in the election. You gotta do your you gotta prioritize your time, right? So yes, so that's why the answer is the 3 houses. But yes, but you all have the right idea for sure. The house where they're not voting, yeah, no, that's you're gonna waste a lot of time there. So, but yes, that's an example of micro targeting where you're not doing your block walking just indiscriminately. You have to be very systematic with how you do it. Okay, sounds good. Okay, let's go ahead and continue. Okay, let's talk about the party organizations here. Okay. So let's talk about party structure here. So party organizations exist at virtually every level of government, and this is true because the major political parties have, you can kind of call them like chapters, so to speak. You know how like large organizations, they have like local chapters. You can kind of compare it to that, where you have the local parties, right? So like here in Hidalgo County, we have, the Hidalgo County Democrat Party, we have the Hidalgo County Republican Party. So they're the same political party, but they operate at the local level because they are. And what the local parties, what the local affiliates of the political parties do, obviously, of course, is to try to win these local elections, right? Especially when it comes to like your countywide elections, your district judge elections, but also to help out, with some of these national elections, as well as your state reps, your state senators, and even, of course, your local member of Congress as well. So right, so the local part, the countywide political party organizations, they help out with all kinds of the political parties, right, at the federal, state, and local levels, because obviously, of course, the federal offices, like when it comes to Congress, like in the House, obviously, of course, they're going to need to mobilize voters from the community because they represent a portion of the of the state, right? Within our local community. So party organization is the formal structure of a political party, including its leadership, election committees, active members, and paid staff, right? So again, so the parties, of course, like we said, they comprise of, again, some paid staff, mostly volunteers, some official members like precinct chairs and people that serve on these state and national committees, as well as the leadership, right? Like the leaders of the DNC and the RNC that we're going to talk about, right? So committee members are elected at local party business meetings called caucuses, and they are best known. The best known are the Democrat National Committee and the Republican National Committee, right? There's also other committees as well within both the Republicans and Democrat side, but these are the two. These are the two most common ones, right? These are basically the organizational leaders of the party, right? So, and then of course, the states also have their own party leaders, right? So Jamie Harrison, he's the leader of the DNC, and then at the state level, for the leader of the Texas Democrat Committee, that's the he's over here from Brownsville, right? Alberto Hinojosa, yeah, that's his name. So he's the leader of the state Democrat Party. So they have that structure here. So let's kind of go in more detail here. Okay. So the national party committees include, again, the DNC and the Democrat National Committee and the RNC, the Republican National Committee. And the functions of the national party committees are to raise funds for candidates, minimize disputes within the party, enhance the party's media image, and set rules for primary elections and caucuses, right? So the party committees, of course, they've got a lot on their plate, right? Because obviously, of course, their main goal and responsibility is, to set it, excuse me, give me just a moment here. Let me just take a quick swig of water. Hold on, give me just a moment. Excuse me. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so let's continue. So when we look at the major functions of the national party committees, obviously, of course, their main objective is, to get their members elected, not just for Congress, not just at the national level, not just for the presidency, but for elective office all throughout the entire country, right? That's why I would never want to be like the leader of the DNC or the RNC, because they're basically like the head coach of a team, and if the team loses, how like the players aren't usually held accountable, but the head coach is usually the first one to go, right? Because they're a lot more easier to get rid of. So I consider like the chair people of the DNC and the RNC to kind of be like the head coaches of the parties. So if they don't win the elections, then they're going to be removed, and someone else is going to get. So if you're in that position, don't plan on being in there for that long, because there's a lot you can do the best job you can, but if they don't win the elections, then you're pretty much going to be out, right? Because it's kind of the nature of the business, so to speak, right? When you work in a business that deals with wins and losses, and those wins and losses are that pronounced, then you're going to be held accountable if your team doesn't win. You probably notice I make a lot of sports analogies with politics, because I see so many of them. I see so many analogies with sports and politics. It's insane how similar they can be. But let's break these down a bit, right? So obviously, of course, to raise funds for the candidates, right? That's why I'm constantly getting emails from the DNC. It's not actually like them personally. They send it out like it's a automated system email, but it does say that it's from them, right? It's not their actual it's not their actual personal address, nor is it their actual official email. It's a mailing list, right? But it still has their name on there. So with that being said, they send out these emails that I'm also getting a lot of text messages again, for donations, right? So they send out, if they have your phone information, like if you participated in party events, they'll send out text messages, they'll send out emails, because they're trying to solicit funds, for the candidates, right? Because as we mentioned before, candidates raise money through private donations in America. They minimize disputes within the party. So this usually does happen during primary season, where candidates are kind of going at each other because they are trying to win the nomination. So the chair people of the DNC and the RNC, they of course will try to get for the candidates to not be so vicious with each other, things like that. There's some good video of like back in the back before the 2016 election where Trump and Ted Cruz were kind of going at it. So that's kind of like a nightmare for like the chair people. Like that was Reince Priebus. He was the previous Republican National Committee chairman. He was like pulling his hair out or whatever hair he had left, I think. But he was just kind of like ugh, he was just like making he was like face palming, just because of how because it made the party look bad, right? Because they were arguing against each other. Yeah, because some of these debates they can get really really heated, which is understandable. I mean that they're competing for for the chance to be the next president. I mean, emotions are high, so I mean it's understandable, but it's still kind of difficult to see, especially like if you're in this position of authority, like within the committees. Enhance the party's media image. So this is why the chair people will go speak to the media. They'll go like on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. They'll go to to the big media outlets, and they'll do interviews, and they'll talk about the state of the party. They'll talk about how trying to win, because they're also trying to convince voters as well, right? They're trying to convince voters to vote for their candidates, to support their specific political parties. They'll talk about what the party stands for, and they'll make those strong arguments, and then set rules for the primary elections and caucuses, right? So the parties also have their specific rules when it comes to not just the style of these elections, whether having a caucuses or a primary election, but also when they happen, because as I mentioned before, Iowa is the state that kicks it off. Then they move on to New Hampshire, then it's South Carolina, and then we get to Super Tuesday, and Texas is part of Super Tuesday. This is where you have a bunch of states that also vote in the primary election. Texas's primary is usually the first Tuesday in March. So less than a year from now, we're actually going to have the next primary election for the 2024 election. So pretty soon, we're going to start to see candidates start announcing for not just for president, but also for some of these other offices and positions. So like I'm interested to see who's going to run in District 15, because we have Monica Monica de Cruz, who she's a Republican. It's the first time a Republican has won this seat. And so we'll see, if the Democrats, who they're going to try to nominate to run against her, right? So we'll see if the Democrats definitely put more emphasis in this congressional district race this time around. So, but anyway, so this is basically what the national committees are responsible for. And like I said, there's other like subcommittees like the DNCC and some of the other ones that are devoted more to state legislature races and things like that. There's a lot of these different organizations because, again, they're trying to win elections all across the board, not just at the national level, but at the state and local level as well. But of course, the national the national races are going to get more attention and obviously more money than some of these more local races because they just don't have the money. Let's talk about fundraising a little bit, because since we're talking about money, perfect segue. I also want to mention really quickly that when I was a precinct chair, one of the things that surprised me was that the local parties don't really get money from the national parties. Like when we were going over like the fundraising numbers, I was like, really? Like, wow, like, so the local party, right? Like the national party doesn't help you all. Like, they don't send you all money. And they were saying that no, they have to do their own fundraising. They have to do like chicken plate sales and all that. I'm like, wow, like, like I didn't know that there wasn't that kind of national support, because again, they don't have unlimited money. So they have to be systematic with where they send their money. Now, super PACs, though, that's another story, right? Super PACs are major vehicles in the money game. We've talked about super PACs a little bit, these political action committees. The super PACs are interesting, right? And of course, the Citizens United case does talk about this. We'll talk about this more in the next chapter. They promote and publicize political issues, including ads. Now, you've probably seen these ads before. These super PACs, they do have some restrictions in terms of what they can do, because they can raise and spend unlimited money as long as it is not coordinated with a party or a candidate. Many super PACs are directed by former party officials and run shadow campaigns on behalf of the party. So let me kind of explain what all this means. So, and the Citizens United case does talk about this, where the super PACs are claiming that it is their First Amendment right to get involved in these elections, because they have the right, to peacefully assemble, and they have the right to petition their government. They have the right to freedom of speech as well. All of that goes into this whole notion of donating to candidates, right? Because the Supreme Court has ruled that donations count as free speech, right? Because I am expressing that I am supporting a candidate, and I have that right to do so. So with that being said, with that being said, there are some rules, right? That they can't coordinate with a candidate, right? They can't officially be working for a candidate, right? Or working with a candidate. But that doesn't mean that they can't help on behalf of a candidate. So I'll give you like an example. So let me also mention that these super PAC ads, you'll know if it's a super PAC ad because they usually have like these really patriotic sounding names, like Patriotic Americans for Freedom, or United for Natural Cause, or something. They have like these really patriotic names. So if you ever see like an organization that has a really patriotic name, that's a good clue that it's a super PAC. Like I said, what these super PACs do is that they run ads, they fundraise because they're trying to win elections, right? The candidates can't go and say, no, you can't do that, because then the super PACs will be like, well, it's our right to get involved. Like, let's say you have a candidate that doesn't like that, like there's a super PAC that's running ads, in support of in support of something. The candidates can't go and say like, no, don't do that, because it's beyond. It's not the candidate's call to determine who gets involved and who doesn't. I don't know if that kind of makes sense in terms of what I'm saying, right? That the candidate can't go and tell these super PACs, no, you cannot go run those ads, because the super PACs are not specifically favoring one candidate officially. It's kind of a shadow thing. Now, it's clear who these candidates are supporting, especially during the general election. So let's say, let's say go back to 2016, Trump versus Hillary again. Let's say you got a super PAC that is trashing Hillary, right? They're not saying that they're affiliated with Trump, but it's pretty clear who they're supporting, right? Because there's only two candidates, right? So you can clearly tell who they're supporting. So you see how they kind of like skirt that, even though they're not officially working with Trump, they can still kind of, they can still work, like in the shadow style of campaign, right? So that's why, some of these people think that this is kind of a little bit shady, because they're not actually, officially working or coordinating. But it's pretty clear who they're supporting, especially when you've got two candidates, right? So that's a little bit of on fundraising here, right? Of course, obviously we get the national conventions, which of course I've mentioned before that I did go virtually to the 2020 Democrat National Convention, because I was I mentioned before to all that I was a national delegate for Bernie Sanders back in 2020. I also attended the virtual Texas Democrat Convention. Again, this was during COVID, so this was like when COVID first happened. So of course everything was virtual. The convention was really cool. I mean, you don't really get a sense for it, because it is virtual as much as you would like if you were actually there in person. But basically, these conventions are interesting, right? Because the national conventions, of course, they formally nominate a party's presidential and vice presidential candidates. A national party convention is held every 4 years and is attended by delegates from each of the 50 states, right? So, of course, I was one of the delegates from Texas. The way it works, let me kind of explain to you all in terms of what these conventions do. A lot of these national conventions are pretty ceremonial when it comes to the nomination process, because nowadays the presidential candidate nomination is already sewn up. It's already the formal nomination is just a formality, right? Because the way, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about the well, I guess we can talk about it right now. Yeah, we already talked about the primary. So let me kind of backtrack a little bit. So the way that these candidates ultimately win a primary is, yes, I mentioned that they have to get more votes than the other candidate, right? And so, but it's not just that. It's also that when a candidate gets a certain number of votes in a state, they also pick up a certain number of delegates, okay? So the parties have a magic number of delegates that a candidate has to reach in order to formally clinch a nomination, right? So with the Democrats, it's like 2,000 something delegates, right? So the candidate that gets to 2,000 something delegates first clinches the nomination. Okay, so that's how that works. Democrats also have what are called super delegates. These are like party insiders, party leaders, like elected officials and former elected officials, like even former presidents. They can also be the super delegates. So the point of all this is that the delegates are tied to the votes, right? At least on the first ballot, right? So the delegates do have to vote according to the vote totals in the states. And the way it works at the state level is they divide up the delegates amongst. So I'll give you an example. So like in Texas, Joe Biden, he won the state. He barely beat Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders came in second. So basically, so in Texas, the way it worked is like Biden got, let's say he got 150 delegates. Bernie got 100 delegates, and so they divided the delegates based on the vote totals, right? So I was one of those 100 for Bernie. So that's the way that works. So then when we get to the national convention, then the delegates formally vote, and then they have that the roll call where they go in order of the states, right? So the states that start with A go first, and then it works all the way down. And then once the candidate gets to the magic number, then they're officially nominated, and then they clinch the nomination. Now, of course, that's not the only thing that happens at the conventions. There's also a lot of business that has to be done, just like any convention. So the delegates make decisions that include drafting the party platform, which contains the party's philosophy, principles, and positions on issues. It's basically what the party believes and what they stand for, right? So every convention has a party platform where they talk about, their beliefs on like immigration, gun control, the abortion issue. They talk about their stances on those issues. And they also set rules that govern the party procedures, right? So there's also committee meetings when it comes to what the rules are going to be for the party moving forward, right? An example was in 2016, on the Democrat side, they made changes to the superdelegate rules, where the superdelegates were not going to have as much influence within the primary process. And I know some of this is like real technical information that if you're not really attuned to to politics, you might not necessarily understand too much. But I'm just giving you all some examples in terms of what are some of the procedures and the work that the delegates and the committee members do within the party conventions here. Okay, all right. So let's kind of move over here a little bit because we're almost running out of time. Congressional committees, of course, each party forms House and Senate campaign committees. So within Congress, you also have the committees that also help their own members try to win re-election. This is also one of the reasons why it's once you get into Congress, it's I don't want to say it's easy to retain your seat, but you get a lot more support because you're actually in the system, as opposed to someone who's trying to knock off an incumbent who doesn't have any of the support, right? So being in Congress definitely gives you a big incumbency advantage because you have access to these committees here, because they try to they try to help to reelect their own members here, and their purpose is to raise a certain sum of money and direct funds to competitive races, especially when it comes to some of these really competitive House seats like District 15. District 15 here in the Valley is one of the most competitive House seats in the entire country because you have an even number of Republicans and Democrats. You got the Democrats that are here in the Valley, but then the district also stretches up towards Seguin and going near Kennedy, that's southeast of San Antonio. So that area, like Beeville, that area tends to be a little bit more Republican than here. George West, that area tends to be a little bit more Republican, and things like that. So that's the reason why District 15 is very competitive, because it's got an even number of Democrats and Republicans. State and local committees, of course, each party has a central committee in each state. Like I mentioned, here in Texas, we have we definitely have, the parties definitely have their own state committees, and they also have lower level committees as well as county committees. So they'll also have lower level committees like regional committees where, like I know, like for the Democrat side, they have like the Coastal Bend committee, which encompasses, counties moving up the Coastal Bend to Corpus and towards Brazoria and Matagorda County, as well as, like I said, the local county committees, like the local, the county, the actual county parties here. So. Okay, all right, so let's see how much time we have, because I definitely want to try to see if we can. Okay, so we got to go through party machines here. Okay, so let's see. Let's just run through this really quickly. So the 19th and early 20th century local parties, of course, were strong. Local party organizations were referred to as party machines. So you probably remember this from history class. Like Boss Tweed over there in New York, Tammany Hall. Those types of corrupt political machines where basically they were buying votes of the immigrants and things like that. You've probably seen this in movies, right? They were often led by corrupt party bosses who controlled party nominations and patronage. Patronage, of course, is resources available to officials to make partisan appointments to offices or confer favors to supporters, right? So the way the party machines would work is they would try to get votes in the community, and they would promise jobs or favors or resources to the people who would support them if they won these elections. Progressive reformers in the early 1900s changed laws and rules which weakened the party machines, but that doesn't mean that the machines went away, because let's kind of be real here. Party machines still exist, especially more at the local level. A lot of these school board races definitely could qualify as, party machines. Obviously, of course, not as blatant and not as in your face as what we saw like at the turn of the 20th century, like in New York and Chicago. But they still exist, where you still have like the politiqueras and the people who go and get involved. I'm sure some of y'all are, if you've lived a little bit, you probably are familiar with some of these people, right? These local elections can get pretty competitive and pretty heated, when it comes to the importance of these elections, right? Because a lot of these politiqueras, want to get jobs within, especially like within the school districts, right? It happens. A lot of these it happens. It's definitely something that we still see. I mean, even in the city of Laredo, back in the 60s and 70s, we still had strong political machines there. Even in more like rural counties and things like that, in South Texas, there's still, and you can look this up. There's research on this. I took a history of Laredo class, and we talked about this, how you still had these political machines that were operating, even just a couple of years ago. So it's much harder to get away with now, but there's still some of it. It still sort of exists here. Okay, so again, since the 1980s, major policy differences between the Democrats and Republicans have emerged. So we've kind of talked about this here a bit in terms of how the Republicans and the Democrats are kind of diametrically opposed when it comes to their viewpoints. Threats Republican support reducing spending on social and healthcare programs, whereas Democrats want to expand funding for public education and social services. They also want a national healthcare insurance system, right? The Democrats want to, Bernie Sanders, of course, with his Medicare for All, and then other Democrat candidates, maybe not necessarily going with Medicare for All, but having universal healthcare, right? So there are some differences, but the idea is to try to get everyone healthcare, right? Cutting taxes on corporations of the wealthy, but Democrats, of course, want higher taxes on the wealthy, protecting rights of gun owners, where on the Republican side, whereas Democrats want to restrict gun ownership, or at least maybe look at the types of firearms that are being purchased, maintain or increasing military spending. The Republicans want to increase that. Democrats want to cut that. They want to use that money on other programs, preserving traditional family structures, opposing abortion, whereas Democrats are in favor of abortion, and they're also more in favor of more lenient immigration policies, where Republicans are a lot more strict when it comes to immigration, such as wanting to build a border wall, and opposing government regulation of businesses, including environmental laws. But Democrats want more regulation of the businesses, especially to more attention to protect the environment, type of thing. So again, that's why it's hard for the Republicans and Democrats to really agree on anything, because you see how like they're polar opposites. Like they're diametrically opposed on these issues here. Okay, let's kind of skip over really quick, because I do want for us to kind of talk about factions within the party, and then we'll talk about and then we'll also talk a little bit about the regions here, right? So parties are broad coalitions of people and groups who agree on a common approach to problems, but they also represent diverse interests competing for power and influence, right? Not everyone in the political parties are going to have the same exact viewpoints. Because these parties are so large and they represent such a large group of people, you're going to find people who are going to disagree, right? They're not going. I just gave you all an example, right? That not all the Democrats are in favor of expanding Medicare. Some of them, some of the more leftists want to, but then some of the more moderate ones want to expand on the Affordable Care Act, right? So again, there's different ways to do this, but again, they still have those disagreements. But at least they're all, the Democrats, though, that they do all agree that we do need, work on healthcare. So at least they do agree on that. The Republican Party is divided in four ways. We've got the pro-business conservatives. This tends to be like your Mitt Romneys, your cosmopolitan, kind of like your big business, Republicans. The far right or alt-right conservatives. So this, and there usually is some correlation between the far right and the social and religious conservatives. They're kind of melding in, they're kind of forming. It's hard to kind of separate those two. So this is kind of your Marjorie Taylor Greens, your Lauren Boeberts. These are kind of like your You're really like the vocal MAGA crew. That's kind of that's kind of where. And this group, obviously, is becoming more of the majority within the Republican Party. And then, of course, you also have the Libertarians. This is more like your Rand Pauls. The Libertarians, of course, like we talked about, they tend to be isolationists when it comes to foreign policy, but they also don't really agree with regulation of the economy. They're not in favor of minimum wage and things like that. So these are kind of like the four major camps within the Republican Party. And then on the Democrat Party, it's divided up amongst the moderates and the progressives, right? So so your moderates would be more like Kristen Sinema, your Joe Manchin, senator from Arizona and senator from West Virginia, respectively. And then, of course, you have your progressives, obviously, like Bernie Sanders, AOC, the Squad, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York. So they disagree because the moderates are more to the center, they're more center left, and then the progressives are more to, kind of like the far left here, right? So they have these disagreements here. Okay, and this, of course, a good picture of the Squad right here. Okay, so then, of course, parties form the basic organization for running Congress. So this will be the last thing we'll talk about really quickly. So let's see. I just want to make sure that we, okay, let's see. I want to do, okay, well, let's kind of run through this really quickly, and then let's just take a little bit more time, and we'll kind of run through this here at the end. Okay, so then, so parties in Congress, so parties form the basic organization for running Congress. What this means here is that the structure of Congress, the leadership in Congress, is based on political parties. We talked before that Kevin McCarthy, the majority, the Speaker of the House right now in the House, he's the Speaker simply because of the fact that there are more Republicans than Democrats in the House. If there were more Democrats than Republicans, Hakeem Jeffries would be the Speaker. So it's always based on which political party has more support, right? So the majority party, the party that holds the majority of the legislative seats in the U.S. House, selects the Speaker of the House because they have more votes than the other side. So as I mentioned before, right, that whoever the Speaker is going to be, the first question that you have to determine is, well, there's two questions, right? Which political party is in the majority, and is that person a member of that majority party? So that's why McCarthy is the current Speaker, because he's a Republican, and so the Republicans control the House right now. The party that holds a minority of legislative seats, the minority party in the U.S. House, votes as well, but the vote is usually along party lines, right? So again, right, and of course there was, I'll add this eventually in the additional resources because it just happened a couple of months ago where McCarthy had to go through all these different votes in order to become the Speaker because he wasn't able to get enough votes to be able to clear the hurdle because there were, again, some of the Gates, right? Gates from Florida. He was wanting for some concessions, and Matt Gates, but he was wanting some concessions and things like that because he's one of those one of the alt-right members, right? So he was he was not going along with McCarthy until McCarthy made some concessions. So ultimately, McCarthy was able to get the victory. But again, the point I'm trying to make here is that the majority, that's how the party leadership is set up, right? Now, the other thing, of course, is that this also leads to the selection of the committees, right? The majority party in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate selects the chair of the committees, and the majority party also controls the legislative agenda, right? So the political parties have power within Congress because the majority party will also determine who the chairs of the committees are, right? So we'll talk about committees later on when we get to Congress, but the chairs of the committees are always going to be members from the majority party, right? So when the Republicans took control of the House from the Democrats, the former Democrat chairs of the committees lost their chairship, and they were replaced by Republicans. So it is very political in terms of the way the committees are set up. And the majority party also controls the legislative agenda because they have more support than the other side, right? So the Republicans are going to be the ones who are going to decide what's going to be worked on within the House. Now, of course, you also have to remember that the Senate is still controlled by the Democrats, so that's divided party government, right? So it's going to be hard for much to be able to get done because, unfortunately, as we talked about, since the parties are so diametrically opposed to each other, it's going to be hard to get, really much of anything done, at least, certainly in this day and age. Individual voters tend to develop a party. So I'm going to give me just a couple more minutes. Let's just kind of give me just a couple of minutes before we end for today, because I just want to cover a couple more things and then we'll end for today. Individual voters tend to develop a party identification and individual voters' psychological ties to a certain party. So again, this is kind of like fandom, right? This is where you just like you follow a sports team, you also follow a specific political party. again, as a former precinct chair, I heard a lot of my fellow precinct chair members. They talked about how like, oh, like we've been lifelong Democrats, and like my father, my grandfather, we were Democrats. So it's kind of a similar thing to like sports fandom, right? Like you'll see like a lot of people who are fans of sports teams will talk about how their parents were fans of the same team, and how they've always been fans of these teams, right? So again, another similar correlation, right, where you still have that party identification and that psychological tie to a certain party. Now, again, with political parties, it's a little bit different, because as a sports fan, you really can't control what the sports team does other than maybe go to the games. But with a political party, you can actually become a member of the party, right? You can actually get involved, and you can actually be a party activist here, right? So party attachments formed in youth are likely to last, because again, it's again similar to like parental upbringing and religion, and what parents teach us. It's also that same type of attachment. Most independents lean toward one of the major parties. Of course, this is another major topic we need to talk about, is that not everyone is affiliated with a political party, right? So there's a large group of Americans who consider themselves independents, right? They're neither Republican nor Democrat, but they will lean one way or another. And of course, the independents are really important, because during election season, they could be the difference in terms of who they decide to vote for, right? So in 2016, a lot of the independents went for Trump, but then in 2020, a lot of the independents moved over to Biden. So the independents definitely can have a large impact when it comes to the elections. And then party activists are the strongest party identifiers. Party activists are the strongest party identifiers. They contribute time, energy, and effort to support their party, right? So these are the party activists are the people who actually get involved in the primary season, right? They keep up with politics on a daily basis. They're out there in the community, and they are trying to help out their parties, right? And they're trying to get their members elected, right? These are the people that are actually going and registering voters, right? These are the people that turn out during election time, right? These are the people who actually are considered party activists, because they are active within their party, right? They don't just show up to vote during election season. They're actually getting people to go vote with them, right? They're actually going and trying to doing the phone banking, calling people, going door to doors, and doing the block walking and knocking, and actually trying to get for people to support their candidate or support the political party here. Okay. Okay, so let's just kind of go through this really quickly, because I do also want to talk about the ideology and religion here, region here really quickly. Let's just talk about these groups, and then we'll end for today. So just give me just a couple more minutes here. Okay. So let's talk about race and identity when it comes to parties. So African Americans, of course, more than 90% identify as Democrats. So the African Americans are definitely one of the most loyal and supportive groups when it comes to the Democrat Party, right? The data, consistently shows the Democrats or around 90. I'm sorry, the African Americans support Democrats at around 90%, right? So the African American community is definitely a sure thing when it comes to Democrats. Although we talked about before about do they actually turn out to vote, right? So the voter turnout rates are not all that high, but in terms of their support and their affiliation, African Americans are going to support the Democrat Party, which definitely makes a lot of sense when it comes to the Democrats of the 1950s and 60s sided with Dr. Martin King Jr. and the civil rights movement. Of course, obviously you had JFK as well as LBJ. They of course were LBJ of course was president when the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act was passed, right? And LBJ was very instrumental in getting those important pieces of legislation passed in the 1960s, right? So of course, obviously, African Americans are going to be thankful for the Democrat Party for assisting them when it came to the civil rights movement here. Latinos and Latinas, Cubans lean. So again, Hispanics are an interesting group, right? Because Hispanics are not monolithic, right? Cubans tend to lean Republican, and this, of course, there's history for this, right? Because a lot of the Cuban Americans that currently, and a lot of them live in South Florida, right? They live in the Miami area, right? A lot of these Cubans have leaned Republican because a lot of these Cubans are either their descendants or because I know we're already it's getting to be about 70 years since, 60, 70 years. These are the Cubans who left after Fidel Castro took over in Cuba, right? So this was when Batista was deposed. Fidel Castro took over, and that's when Cuba became a communist country, right? And of course, with the communists moving in, Fidel Castro nationalized everything, right? He nationalized like, the businesses. He nationalized like all the casinos that were going on. There's a great scene in The Godfather Part 2, which shows when Batista, when he leaves. And I don't know if any of y'all seen that movie. It's one of my favorite movies. But yeah, so ultimately the Cubans leave. Especially like a lot of the richer Cubans, a lot of the business owners, they left, because of the nationalization of the industries there in Cuba. So Cubans have leaned Republican because they've had that animosity towards like they've had that animosity towards like the far left, so to speak, right, in terms of because they perceive as Fidel Castro being like too far left and things like that, right? So or at least when Castro was alive, he passed away a couple of years ago, but now his brother his brother's still there in power, right? So that's why Cubans tend to lean Republican, because they being against communism. Again, Mexicanos are heavily Democrat, but again, this is also not so synonymous, right? We are seeing in the last couple of years, especially here in the Valley, we've seen more, Mexicanos, lean that they've been moving towards the Republican Party. Again, there's a lot of different reasons for this. There's economic reasons. There's also, a lot of the Hispanics I've talked to, they've talked about, well, the Democrats have been in power here locally for a lot of years and things haven't gotten better. So they want to try something new. Another thing is that there's also some divisions between, lifelong Hispanics that live here in Texas, as well as, the immigrants that are coming over, right? Because they might not necessarily view them in the same way, right? They might see them as like competition, or they might not necessarily see them as, of the same type of family, so to speak, right? So there might be those divisions, right, because of citizenship issues. But then in California, the Mexicanos over there do tend to still be more Democratic. But a strong Democratic shift occurred in 2008 when 67% of Latinos supported President Obama. And this trend continued with 69% voting for Democrats in 2018. But again, we'll see how that changes, and this is something that's still ongoing, right? This is still something that is we'll still see if this is something that it's going to be interesting to see like how the Hispanic vote shifts, right? Because in Arizona, the Hispanics are starting to mobilize more, and the Hispanics were one of the major reasons why Arizona was able to flip blue in 2020, not just for President Biden, but also for Joe Kelly, Kristen Sinema, the two Democratic senators out there. So the Hispanics were very big on that. Ruben Gallego, the current one of the current House members there, is actually going to run against Kristen Sinema in this next election for the Senate. So he's Hispanic, and we'll see how that goes, right? Asian Americans were divided in the past elections, but now solidly favoring Democrats here. And we've talked about before how they're also not a monolithic group, because you've got all kinds of different Asian groups, right? Like, the Far East Asians, South Asians, Middle Eastern, and they have their differences. Okay, so gender really quickly, men and women differ overall, in their party identification and voting behavior. We've talked about the gender gap here before, of course, that more women identify as Democrats and more men identify as Republicans. Not all the time, but on average. And then the gender gap, of course, distinctive pattern of voting behavior reflecting the differences in views between men and women. So men tend to be a little bit more conservative than women. So we see those views reflected within the political parties that they support. There's also partisan diversity along religious lines. Nearly 90% of Jewish Americans identify as Democrats. And then the white evangelical Protestants have been drawn to the Republicans. Conservative stances on social issues such as opposition to same-sex marriage and abortion. So people, the Jewish community tends to vote Democrat. The evangelical, Protestant groups like your Baptist, the Baptist definitely, your Methodist, as well as all these non-denominational groups, they tend to vote Republican because of their strong belief in these social issues. So this is why, and of course we saw this like in the 1970s with Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell with the formation of like, the other groups like Focus on the Family, as well as the Moral Majority. So we've seen some of these groups, get involved in the political process and actually, try to help, win these elections, right? So that's why a lot of these evangelicals, they vote Republican because of the social issues that they are concerned about. And those who are unaffiliated with a religion strongly favor Democrats. So atheists usually vote for Democrats. Okay, so last couple of things. Let's just take a look at class and ideology and region, and then we'll end for today. So also, class also has a major distinction when it comes to party identification. So the New Deal era of the 1930s, upper income Americans were mostly Republicans and lower income Americans were mostly Democrats. this also this is an interesting phenomenon because this is not just in the 1930s, right? This also occurs even today. One of the main reasons why the Valley, as well as South Texas and moving along the border region, why this area tends to be Democrat is usually because of class. Because of the fact that South Texas tends to be one of the poorest areas in the country, although that is changing a little bit, but still one of the more poor areas in the country. You know, yes, we see all this growth that's going on. You know, they're like on where in the expressway, but we still also have some colonias in parts of Hidalgo County and even in Starr. If you go to Starr County, you'll see the poverty there. It's even more pronounced. But those areas tend to vote Democratic because they affiliate the Democrats with the the economic the economic issues that Democrats are in favor of. What I mean by this is that because Democrats tend to favor more of these social programs, such as the SNAP program, the Social Security payments, disability, as well as Medicaid, which is the federally funded health care for poor people. The benefits, right? The benefits that these lower income people get, they affiliate those benefits with the Democrat Party because they know that the Democrats are more in favor of those social programs than the Republicans. My grandpa, he clearly told me this himself when he was alive. He told me that that's the reason why he votes Democrat, because the Democrats are more in favor of those social programs than Republicans. Republicans are looking to cut those programs. So because a lot of people rely on those programs here locally, this is one of the main reasons why there's so much Democrat support here locally, because of those social programs, right? So class is still a major political driver for political affiliation, even here locally, right? And then today, class patterns now are less clear, especially and again, and as this area becomes more diverse, right? As the poverty is starting to diminish, we're starting to see more of these expensive houses. I mean, the housing market is getting even more expensive here. You're going to start to see more Republicans, right? I've seen some people, who were lifelong Democrats shift Republican, and one of the main reasons is because now they're doing well, and they want to, now they believe more in lower taxes because they want to keep some of that hard-earned money, which I don't blame them for that. I mean, that's totally acceptable. I mean, I totally get why they're that way. But because, and there is that correlation, right? The more money you make, the more likely you might tend to lean more Republican, because Republicans are more in favor of lower taxes. Obviously, of course, you're not going to be concerned about those social programs because you're not going to qualify for them anymore. So now it's moving towards where you might want to be more in favor of lower taxes, right? But again, so whites without a college degree, the working class, are now heavily Republican. You definitely see this like in more of the rural areas, like especially like in East Texas, like in the Piney Woods. Trump signs everywhere out there, because a lot of it's more of a white-dominated area, but there's still a lot of poverty, which is interesting, right? Because these people also receive government assistance, right? They're also on the SNAP programs, the food stamps. These people used to be Democrats, back in the 1930s. But now they've moved to Republican because now the social issues are more important than the economic ones to them. And then in 2020, college graduates prefer Democrats, right? So the more educated you are, the more likely you are to support Democrats. Okay, last thing we'll talk about today, and then we'll end, I promise. Okay, so then ideology and party identification are also closely linked. Obviously, of course, conservatives tend to support the Republican Party, liberals support the Democrat Party. This is pretty synonymous. And then regional distribution of the vote has given rise to the notion that America is divided between red and blue states, right? So the map definitely does show this to you all really quickly in terms of red versus blue. Now, what I also want for us to look at here, though, is that it's not just red versus blue, right? There is a lot of purple here in there, right? So you see that there's if you look at a state like Oklahoma, you might think or Alabama's a better example, right? Mississippi. You might think to yourself, oh, like, Mississippi and Alabama, they're always voting, Republican for the presidency. But you can see that they do have a lot of blue areas, right? Like the Montgomery, Alabama here, Jackson, Mississippi. So they still have a lot of blue areas, but in terms of the national politics, they still overwhelm, the states still overwhelmingly go for Republicans. But let's talk about some of these regions here really quickly, right? In terms of what the book is talking about, right? So Republicans are strong in the South, the Great Plains, and the Mountain West, right? So when it comes to the South tends to vote Republican. The Great Plains here. So this is the Great Plains and the Mountain West over here, right? So going along here, these are your Republican areas for the most part, right? Then going back to the Democrats, they're strong on the West Coast and the upper Midwest and the Northeast. So Democrats do well up here in the Northeast, as well as the Midwest. This is the Rust Belt, and the West Coast for the most part, as well as a little bit over here towards the southern west, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. And so this is these are Democrat areas. I also forgot Utah. Utah also is on the Republican side. Nevada also tends to be more on the Democrat side. But Nevada is actually a pretty interesting swing state, because with Nevada, you see it's mostly Republican, but over here in Vegas and Reno, this is the Democrat side. You also have to remember that hardly anybody lives out here, right? So if you look at Texas, you see that there's a lot more red, but nobody lives out here, right? This is all just countryside, right? The major metropolitan areas are blue areas, right? This is Houston, this is San Antonio, Austin, this is the Metroplex, right? Down here along the border, right? So you can see how, again, when you look at maps, you might say to yourself, oh, like, America, there's a lot of red, but you have to remember that nobody really lives out here. Nobody lives out here in western Nebraska, right over here in Wyoming, right? It's the blue areas are your urban areas, and your rural areas are going to be more Republican. So, okay, let's go to an end here for today. Sorry that took a long time. I'm sorry that we went really over. I apologize for that. I just wanted to just kind of make sure that and thank you for sticking by. I really appreciate that, everyone. Thank you all so much. Let me stop the recording here. So.